Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Bugaji, and this is the necessary considerations to learn the skill of writing. You can check out the slide deck over at bit.ly/writing strategies 2020. Some people like to have a two-screen experience when they're enjoying these videos, so you can watch the slide deck on one screen and watch a video on another. So if you want to do that, go ahead and type in that URL, or you open up your camera app and scan over the QR code, and it'll pop up on a second device, and you can have that two-screen experience. Also, the hashtag for this event is Blended Learning Jungle, which is why I've got my jungle shirt on. So shall we get into it? These are the necessary considerations to learn the skill of writing. Like I said, my name is Chris Bugaji. You can check out all of my nonsense over at chrisbugaji.com. I work in Northern Virginia as an assistive technology specialist. But outside of that, I also do presentations, and I've gotten to write a couple books. The most recent book is called The New Assistive Tech, Make Learning Awesome for All. And you can check that out over at bit.ly/the new AT for all. So go check that out. That book is all about designing inclusive educational experiences using technology as a support. So check it out. Now I've got some disclosures to tell you about. My first disclosure is that I do a weekly podcast called Talking with Tech, which is all about augmentative and alternative communication. So check that out over at talkingwithtech.org. I also do presentations sometimes, and sometimes I make some courses. So you can check those web-based courses. You can go check those out over at exceptionaled.com. I also receive royalties from that book that I mentioned before. So, buy my book. Like I said, that's The New Assistive Tech, Make Learning Awesome for All. And if you want to see all the rest of my disclosures, you can check them out over at bit.ly/cbdisclosures. All that said, there's one other disclosure I have to tell you about, and that is that my wife and I also do a podcast called the Nightlight Stories podcast. So Nightlight Stories is a podcast where we put out original stories that my wife and I have collaborated on. We wrote the stories together, and then she turns on her narrator voice, and she often records them as podcast episodes. Occasionally I do it too, but mostly it's her. And so we've got over 62 stories that are available for free. Just go sign up on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And it's over at nightlightstories.net is the website. But our most recent story is called The Cloud. And The Cloud is actually a novella that we wrote a couple of years ago about some fourth graders who use technology to solve a mystery. It kind of has like this Scooby-Doo sort of vibe. And they're using contemporary technology that you'd find in classrooms right now to solve this mystery. And the mystery, not to give too much away, no spoilers here, but people in their school are starting to get sick. So a lot of the strategies that are shared in the story in this novella, they kind of parallel what's happening right now with the idea of education in a distance learning environment, but then also learning about how to mitigate infectious diseases. So check it out, because it might be fun for you and your kids to listen to. Certainly, teachers in the past have used the stories as an educational platform or as an educational tool to talk about different topics, and it's just another format for people to enjoy. So check it out. And the reason I mention it here is because we write, obviously, and this is a writing video, but also because TextHelp is a sponsor of that podcast. So if you go listen, you'll hear them come up as in pretty much every episode, us giving them a shout out to go check out their products. All right, so let's dive into writing here with necessary consideration number 1, which I like to say is what over how. And so what do I mean by that? Well, here we go. So when I talk about writing, what I really mean is composing. This is the idea that someone has thoughts in their head. They have to put them down into some sort of way that can be consumed by someone else through script or text, right? And that other person would then consume those thoughts. So the skill here isn't necessarily grabbing a utensil and handwriting it, right? Or necessarily typing, but it's any way you get those thoughts out in a way that produces that script or that text. So that might be using a pencil or pen or marker or something like that, a crayon. It also might be like Kermit here, typing away at an old keyboard or an old typewriter, or doing it on a computer, right? It might be texting on your phone, right? It also might be using speech to text, having some sort of microphone, and then the microphone translating what your speech is into text on the screen. All of those are different forms of writing. Those are the how of writing. But what's more important is the what. What are you trying to say? And are you composing it in a way that will make sense to the person who's consuming it? So, how doesn't matter quite as much as what you write. Feel free to write on a piece of paper or write with your Apple Pencil there or whatever, stylus on a tablet or text message. As educators who design educational experiences for students, our task here is to not force them to use one way or another, but to provide them options to choose what would work best for them given this task that's in front of them. For some tasks, maybe it's okay to text message. For others, maybe it's okay to handwrite. For others, maybe it's you'd want to be typing. It's helping them understand what works for them in the moment. And that includes the idea of maybe talking into the computer, like Scotty here, right? Okay, so necessary consideration number 2 is write where you want. This is often skipped in many discussions about writing. It's talking about, you've probably heard about different forms of how you're getting your thoughts out in the past. Like I said, all those different modalities I just mentioned. But what is often not talked about is where do you actually do the writing? Like, what's your physical space like? And so I want to take a moment just to discuss that. When I was in school, I was told the best place for me to write was to sit at a desk and put my hands on that desk and put my feet flat on the floor and write that way. And what I've come to learn over the years is that works for some people sometimes, but that is not necessarily the best place to write at all times. In fact, when I was writing my own book, I didn't sit at a desk every single time. Sometimes I sat at a table. Sometimes I sat at a higher table outside. Sometimes I sat, crisscross applesauce with my laptop on the couch and I wrote. And sometimes I did belly typing, laying on my belly, typing away because it just felt comfortable that way. And I really wanted to be next to my dog, right? So although that's true for me, it's also true for students as well. It's one of the reasons we may have seen some students actually flourishing in the distance learning environment is that they weren't necessarily meant to sit at a desk and they weren't forced to sit at a desk for all this time. They got to choose where they wanted to engage in their work, right? Including their writing. So despite this saying considerations for designing flexible learning spaces for writing, it really goes beyond that. It's more than just writing. It's really having flexible learning spaces for whatever task you're working on. And being, again, offering the choice to students, and then, again, having them reflect on that choice. Was sitting in the dark doing this the best choice? What would you do differently? What tool would you use differently? What would you, if you could do that task over, what would you change about that task? Inviting students to reflect on the choices they've made is where the sweet spot is in helping them determine what's the best place to write the next thing they're going to write. All right. Consideration number 3 is motor memory takes practice, right? No one's born great at being a typist or a handwriter or a text messenger. All of those things take motor planning that eventually, if you keep doing it and you do it with enough practice, it eventually becomes motor memory, so you don't have to think about it as much. And that also includes speech to text, using these motor movements to formulate your thoughts and convey your thoughts in a speech to text format. These also take motor planning and motor memory. There's no escaping it if you're going to be writing. So hyper-focusing on one way of practicing, let's talk about keyboarding here. There's a couple different tools tools here that can help make the skill of keyboarding and learning the skill of keyboarding more fun, because at first it seems so daunting and it feels like drudgery, but then as you get more and more proficient at it, you don't even think about it anymore. So two particular tools that I just want to point out. One is play.typeracer.com there, and that is just a game that you can play where you practice typing and your car moves across the screen and you're racing other people who are also typing. And it's super fun and engaging for students. Another one is Button Base, and that particular website gives you different songs that you can choose. And when you pick the song, it gives you a string of characters that you type in to play the song out loud on your keyboard. So I often like to use the Indiana Jones as an example, the Indiana Jones theme, or the Imperial March, from Star Wars, dun, 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 dun. So you can do that. The characters come up on the screen, and then you type on your keyboard, the characters are on the screen, and you're the one making the music, which again, super fun for students. All right, consideration number 4, write for an authentic purpose and an authentic audience. The days of writing for your teacher and they read your work and then it ends up in the garbage can are over. And if they're not over, they should be over. The point of writing is to change someone's mind or influence them or give them information. We write for a purpose, and that's why writing exists in the first place, is to convey a message to somebody else. So let's let that somebody else be a true person that could really benefit from reading whatever you wrote, right? And so what are some examples of writing for an authentic purpose and an authentic audience? So one is to write a review. Before you spend your time or your money on a product out in the world, oftentimes you read a review. If you're buying something off of Amazon, you might scroll down and say, is this worth my time? Is this worth my money? Before you go see a movie, you might read a review, or you might talk to some people about it or read people's reviews of it, and you'd see, okay, is this worth my time? Is this worth my money? So this is something that is part of our culture now, is to leave reviews about products or experiences that exist out in the world, and students can contribute to that. Imagine students writing a review of a book that they read, and then they could take that book, and let's say it's in the library or wherever it might be, and you put a QR code on the back of that book or on the inside cover, and a student would then open up that book and they'd see a bunch of QR codes, and they'd scan the QR code where they'd then see let's say a Google Doc or a website of some text from another student who has read this book and written a review. That is an authentic writing experience. Write to a friend or a family member, or write an article for an organization or a company. So what is this picture you're looking at here on this particular slide? Well, that's actually my son. And my son wrote a blog post for Text Help about why he likes using the tool RaiQ. And so here he was practicing his writing, and he then was published on an actual blog from an actual company, right? Which is a very authentic purpose, and he was very motivated to do this. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that he sat down in one sitting and did it, and so that's foreshadowing for what's coming up next. It's just the idea that he was very motivated to write because he knew it might help other people. Write a story for peers. There's lots of students that are emergent readers. So you could be explaining something you learned in a class. You could be telling an original story that you've written, but with the idea that it's going to be read by somebody else. Write a script for a play or a video or some sort of other media performance. And you could always write to participate in some sort of discussion. I mean, that's also something that is very prevalent in our day and age, is to participate in discussion boards and to be able to respond and respect and reflect on what someone else has written, and then you write a response to it and they write a response back to it. These are all very authentic experiences that we can invite students to write for. All right. Necessary consideration number 5 is that we write in phases. Yeah, it's not really true that you can sit down and be an effective writer in one sitting. Of course, depending on the length of the work. I mean, sure, if you're composing a tweet, maybe. If you're composing a text message, maybe. But if you're doing some sort of any longer form writing, it's very rare that you just sit down and plop it all out once and then it's done, right? There's sort of a phase that you go through. And so those phases, here, let me move this out of the way so you can see that, is, here, I'll put myself over here, is develop the idea. So you got to have some sort of ideas about what to write. And then you might collect some more information to help refine those ideas or maybe fulfill those ideas. And then you got to draft up those words and put them down in some way. And once they're down, that's not where it stops there. Now you have to go back and edit it or revise. And then maybe you go back and edit and revise. And then you maybe go back and edit and revise again. And then you publish the work so other people can read it or experience it. And then I didn't put it here because it's only sometimes do you do this. You might revise again, right? And then at the end, you reflect on the entire process and you do it again. You've just been through a process that helped you grow as a writer. And that means you can continue to grow by continuing to go through these phases over and over and over again. My son, for instance, when he was writing this blog post, right, he didn't sit down once and do it. He developed his ideas, got them out. Then he had to go and find some more information. He had to collect some information that he thought he had some ideas out, but he wanted to just confirm that he was saying the right thing. And so he watched some YouTube videos and he collected information that way. Then he wrote up a draft. And got it down. And then he sent that over to me and his mom. And we read those things together and we gave him some comments and some feedback where we've asked him reflective questions. And then he went back and he revised it. And then it went back to us again. And we gave him some more reflective feedback until he eventually got something that he felt good about. And then guess what? It went off to Text Help, and Text Help looked at it and they had some more revisions and made some suggestions. And so they did, minor ones, but still revisions. And so he had to go through that multiple phases of writing before it was published in a way that other people could consume it and that a lot of people felt comfortable about. And that is really the role of educators when you're talking about these writing experiences that you're designing for students, is that yes, you might be publishing and you should be publishing to an authentic audience, but it's not the first draft. You as an educator, they could be writing for you so that you could provide feedback so that eventually they're writing for somebody else, that it actually is going to live someplace else, right? All right, necessary consideration number 6 is that tools support strategies, not the other way around, okay? Not strategies support tools, right? Which means tools comes last, okay? You need to have a strategy that you're approaching, you're writing with, and then you use a tool to support that strategy. So you can't just throw tools around or you're going to end up getting hit in the face or you're going to end up with a drill up your nose, right? You need some sort of strategy, some sort of approach to wrap your writing around, right? And there's different tools that will allow you to do that, right? So same idea here is you need some sort of strategy, right? The tools don't mean anything unless you have a strategy that goes with them. So what are some strategies for that first phase, that development phase of writing? So strategies up in the top, tools down in the bottom. What are some strategies? One strategy there is, of course, you probably heard of it before. It's called brainstorming, where there is no bad ideas. You're just plopping out ideas whenever you can to get your ideas out. You probably heard of KWL charts. Tell me what you know, tell me what you want to know, and then tell me what you've learned. See, Think, Wonder is another one. You can experience those links on your own. RAFs is another one. Here, quickly, I'll show you that one so you can see what's linked here. RAFs is to think about your role. Think about the audience that is going to be reading what you're writing, thinking about the format that you're going to use to put it together, what's the topic of your writing, and then using strong verbs in your writing, right? So this, again, just a quick mnemonic. It's a strategy to help people become more effective writers, right? Now, what are some tools that go along with that? Well, sure. Padlet is one. Padlet is like a online sticky notes website where you can put sticky notes all over. So again, if you're brainstorming and just rapid fire, get your thoughts out and you plop them all over the place. Google Keep is similar in that way. You can quickly create notes and then move them around and organize them. Jamboard is another one, and OneNote is another one. Of course, there's plenty more beyond this. This is just some sample tools. Now let's talk about strategies for collecting information. So, all right, I've got some ideas out. right? But now I got to hone that in. I got to find if I'm missing anything. I got to find additional resources that might prove the claims that I'm making in my ideas, right? And so I go out and I do some research. And the strategies I might use when I'm doing that research is something like color coding. So imagine I was doing I was writing something about, I don't know, saving polar bears because they're going extinct, right? So as I'm doing research on that, I might find information about where polar bears live. And I would highlight that information, let's say maybe using a blue highlighter. And then when I find information about what polar bears eat, maybe I highlight that information in green. And if I find information about people who study polar bears, I highlight that information in pink, and so on and so forth. And then I can take those color coding pieces of information that I've highlighted, and I can restructure them and move them around and put them in the order that I want to make them my own, right? To cite the places I got them, but to create my own idea about what I'm taking all this information and synthesizing it to make it my own. Another way of collecting information and another strategy to use is tagging or labeling. So down here, this is an example of someone writing an essay on ferrets, and they are using Google Keep. And so these are all Google Keep notes. And one way that they organize their notes is they put a hashtag ferrets at the end of all of their things, all of their notes, which allows them to then give this little, it's called a label. And when they have a wall of sticky notes, they can organize it to just the sticky notes they need by clicking on one of those links like this, clicking on this tag or label, and it shrinks everything down and just pulls everything to the notes that you have that particular label or tag. So it's an organization strategy. Text annotation allows you to write on top of the whatever the screen is or tool is that you're looking at. So wherever the content is, you can annotate over top of it. And sketchnoting is a completely different animal, which is, if you haven't seen that, go ahead and click on that link and check it out. Sketchnoting, what that is the idea that you might be listening to someone present some material or reading some material, and you are sketching out, making a collage or a diagram by listening to the content or experiencing the content. That is how you're taking notes, is by doodling, if you will. And of course, there's so many different tools that will help you. There's Google Keep, which I mentioned over before. Read and Write collect highlights. So Read and Write is, of course, a Textile product that you can use, and it has a collect highlights feature that goes really well with that color coding strategy. And then others like the Textile PDF reader, where it allows you to do that text annotation over PDF content. All right, strategies for drafting. So now I've got my ideas down and I've got them backed up with other information I've collected from different resources. Now it's time for me to organize those and draft them up. So when I'm drafting them, again, I might need a strategy because I might get lost if I don't have one. So some strategies of note would be mind mapping, putting all of the information into some sort of diagram, right? Storyboarding, if I was telling some sort of story or putting things in a linear format, I might draw a storyboard where it's a panel and another panel and another panel, and I can sequence out what I want to happen. It's also known as plot diagramming, or it's a similar strategy. I might have trouble picking out words that I want to use. Like I used that RAFS strategies and I needed strong verbs. Well, maybe I had some in my notes that I collected, but I want even stronger verbs, or I want more word choice. So I might create a word bank for myself that have different words I want to make sure I use in the body of my writing. Word prediction is another strategy, is that as I'm starting to compose and I might be doing my typing, if spelling gets in my way or I'm not sure what the word might be that I need, well, word prediction gives me some ideas of what the words are that I want to choose. And then voice notes allows me to get my thoughts out without any text at all. And the idea there is that I can compose my thoughts just using audio, and then I can go back and I can type those in or use speech to text by going back and just listening to the audio recording to get all of the thoughts out without having that motor aspect getting in my way. And then different tools that will do that are like MindMeister and LucidChart are big for mind mapping. Storyboard that has got animated like cartoon characters that you can use, animations. I mean, they're static animate, so they don't move. They're cartoons that are static that you'd put onto the storyboard. Tar Heel Reader and Book Creator allow you to be authors of actual books. And of course, the Read and Write tool has word prediction and voice notes. All right. You've drafted it up. You think you've got it pretty good. You then put it on the shelf for a little bit and you come back and you look at it with fresh eyes or with your ears. And so with revising, you might take a look at the words that you used and you'd be like, man, I kept using the word very, 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 way too much, right? And one strategy that can help you realize that is to use a word cloud. So you could take the block of text that you've drafted, pop it into one of these tools like Vislo or word clouds. And what happens is the words that you've used most frequently become larger. So if your theme is about polar bears, maybe extinction is one of the words that you'd want to be very large there, or science or save, right? And if one of the words was, I don't know, go or open or anything that was against the theme, like vary, right? Well, then maybe you'd want to go back and vary your word choice, right? Text to speech is a tool often used for revising, where you hit the play button and you listen back to what you wrote, because often your ears will pick up the mistakes your eyes missed. Your eyes will lie to you over and over and over again. Well, you're going to read stuff over. You're going to think you thought you put all the words there or that you spelled everything correctly. And when you look at it, yeah, looks right. But then when you hit the play button, listen to it, that's when something might pop out that your eyes missed. And then grammar check and spell check. But the trick there is to turn off grammar and spell check until you're done. Note that this here comes during the revising phase, not during the drafting phase. But so often the tools we use have this turned on as a default feature. But that can interrupt a lot of students' thoughts. So imagine you're working on your drafting and your spelling is not your forte yet. And you might have lots of grammar issues. So you are constantly seeing little red squigglies and little blue squigglies. And it's constantly going, oh, I spelled that wrong. Oh, I spelled that wrong. One thing, it can be demoralizing. And two, you might be in the flow, right? You might be in that moment where you are really thinking about what you want to write and you're in it. You're just there. And then this thing keeps interrupting you and it keeps breaking your flow. So a quick strategy there is to turn that off. And then you still got to use it. You go back and you turn it back on in the revising phase where you do a one-time just after you listen to it. And I also want to check it for grammar and spelling. Let me hit those buttons and try those. And so different tools, like I said, word cloud generators are Vislo and word clouds. And then Read and Write for Google Chrome, of course, has text to speech and all the Read and Write products. And of course, then the grammar check, the check it tool in Read and Write as well. Now, if you are inviting students to write for an authentic purpose and an authentic audience, then something they have to recognize is that their audience that they're writing for is likely diverse, right? And so we need to make sure that we're helping kids realize that what they're writing needs to be checked for accessibility. So two of the predominant word processing tools out there are Google Docs and Microsoft Word. So that's why it's included here. Two strategies, or I guess two tools that you can use to help with the strategy of checking your work for accessibility is Grackle Docs for Google Docs. You click on this, you install this extension, and you click on it, and it goes through your Google Doc, checking for accessibility and alerting you to any errors you may have created and made by mistake. And the same thing with the Microsoft accessibility checkers. Because this way, we design a more inclusive future where kids are thinking about the diverse needs of everybody out there, not just kids like them. Right? And then the second to last part, although you might continue to go back and revise, is publishing the work. So now I'm going to actually hit the publish button and I'm going to put it out to the world. That might be through a blog, like a classroom blog. It might be an article like my son did. It might be It might be a social media post, or even traditional media. My son, when he was in middle school, our middle school had worked out a deal with the local paper. It still comes once a week to our house, where they publish students' work in the paper. They had one, half a page on different students' short stories that they've written. So traditional media is certainly a thing. And then there are, of course, different tools that you can use. Even if the student's not posting to their own Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you can always have a classroom or teacher or anonymous one in some cases. And of course, a Google site is a great place to post that kind of material as well, and different blogs. Okay. It's important to understand, though, that in a digital society, that when you're looking, just because you've hit the publish button doesn't mean that you're done. You might go back and you might revise that situation or revise that writing again because something got updated. I don't know if you've ever seen that on websites where it says has been updated on this day, has been updated on this day, and there's some more blocks of content. Sure, why not? Why not continuing to revise so that it's not just one static, this is the moment when I publish this and this is all it is ever. It's almost a thing is, are you ever done writing, or could you always go back and make more revisions and changes? Yeah. All right. And so once it's all done, I had mentioned this earlier, but I want to come back and mention it again. An important part of the writing process is reflecting on what you wrote and how you wrote it, right? So one way teachers can help here is by participating in something called writers' conferences or writers' workshops, where as they've been going through each phase of the writing process, or once it's all over, the educator is working with them, giving them reflective questions. So what did you think about this? How did that work for you? What would you do differently? Do you feel like what you'd set out to do and to help with your audience is the message that you conveyed? And then also part of the reflection process is measuring your writing and then analyzing those measurements, right? And so one tool that is helpful there is RIQ, which is a tool that helps measure students' writing. Again, my son wrote a whole blog post about it, so go read that. I won't tell you there. I got a slide on it that helps you understand, but it helps kids give metrics. It gives you metrics to help you better understand your writing. And I just want to mention that many kids will resonate with this because of the video games they play. Video games, many of them have some sort of statistics that go along with them. I don't know if you've ever played like Madden, or some sort of sports game, but there's all sort of statistics that are built into the game, So why not provide these materials and this sort of feedback to students and let them start using that to analyze their own writing, right? So, and then other tools are like leaving comments on Google Docs, using Google Forms so that even in this distance learning, if you can't be with somebody in the same space, or if you've got lots of authors that you're working with, they could be answering the reflective questions on their own, even if you can't get to them. Again, helping them think about it on their own and independently. And then if they've published to an authentic audience, they might be getting authentic feedback from people. So looking at people's comments and people's own reviews of their own work. So my culminating thought here is, just like Robin Williams says in Dead Poets Society, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. And that is exactly what writing is meant to do. And that's exactly what we want kids to be engaging in right now, to have an empowering experience around writing. They have to realize that their writing impacts people's thoughts, people's lives, and people's mindsets. So students, your writing matters. What you write matters. Teachers, you helping guide them to become better writers really matters. And so I hope these tools and strategies help students become better writers. My name is Chris Bugaji. You can check out more information at chrisbugaji.com. And thank you so much, everybody, for engaging in this video. Talk to you later.